Okay, thanks a lot, Seth. Hello, everybody. As Seth says, my name's Graham Brown. I'm one of the pre-sales solutions engineers based in the UK, specifically focusing on TrueSight Operations Management and TrueSight Capacity Optimization products, or certainly those are the ones I've been more involved with. As Seth says, the session's about the ITDA log analytics. It's the first one of these best practices sessions that actually has focused on ITDA, so we thought it was a good idea to have a sort of getting started session. And really the intention is to provide you with a sort of jump start and some thoughts and things you can take away and hopefully apply in your own environment with regards to ITDA. Let's show my slide. Here we go. Okay, so first of all, just a very high level, what is log analytics and ITDA? It's really about providing the ability to mine the log information, event information that's out there across your whole environment and give you that real-time capability and insight into that richness of data that's available and potentially untapped at the moment. And how it works is that it collects and indexes that data, the log data, the events from all the different sources, and really provides you an easy way to search and visualize and analyze that information and identify data patterns and trends. Okay, and as it says, so at a high level, why you need it, it's about being able to access all that data very quickly, very easily. There's a lot of richness of data out there and being able to uncover root cause to particular issues. And it does a lot of joining together, correlating that data, coalescing the data to identify anomalies to you so you can be pinpointed to actually issues that are out there in the environment that you can find manually, but it takes a lot of effort to do it without a tool like this. So drilling down more specifically into the areas that I'm going to focus on today in our brief demonstration is very much about using ITDA to look at some log files. But the fact that I'm using log files, it's equally relevant to the other forms of data it can process, the events and so on that you saw on the previous slide. Most of our customers are already monitoring all of their systems in terms of physical systems, virtual environments, applications, databases, and other components using TSOM, which obviously collects a lot of detailed metrics, rich information about performance and availability. But as I mentioned, there's a wealth of information available in log files about all of these different components as well, which tends to be additional information that's useful. And so there'll be things about the systems, the databases, applications, and even business level information that contains data about the run rate activity of those components, or more specifically, some good nuggets of information about errors or exceptions that have occurred. So rather than having to manually collect those log components and go and drill into them when something's happened, or if you want to analyze the environment, then ITDA allows you to easily collect and process that information and then be able to drill in and understand what's happened, be able to alert on what's happened if you need to as well. And just give you that easy way of doing it and really automate the process. And in terms of ITDA, why you should care as TSOM users, I was thinking about this, and to me it's these three things. One is that as a TSOM user, if you've already got a TSOM license, then ITDA is part of your license. It's something I certainly would recommend you try it and have a go and see if you can use some of the things we talk about today. It's to me, it's going to help you reduce downtime because of the ability to analyze what's happened in the log files and identify things really quickly, and hopefully, as I say, what we go through will just give people a couple of ideas And when I first looked at ITDA, I saw it. It's collecting log file information. You start thinking, well, it's doing log file monitoring, but it's so much more than just monitoring log files. Yes, it can pull together log file information and alert on particular strings, but that is a very small part of what it can do. There's so much more enhanced capability around correlating that information, pulling data together across multiple log files. That's over and above what you may have seen in existing log file monitoring that you have. As this was part of a first session, I just wanted to touch on the architecture of the product, but I don't want to go into this in any detail. Just really to touch on three different things at this point. One is that ITDA, it comprises of a number of components. You can see here it looks potentially complex, but it's really simple. You can install these components all on one server or VM, or spread them across multiple servers or VMs. So if you want to try it out with your license you've already got as part of TSOM, you can install it on a single server. But on the flip side, you can expand as you expand out to pull data from more logs and events and so on, then it scales horizontally. You can split the components across multiple machines, and various components can be installed in multiple instances. So that's indicated here for things like the search server, the indexer, and collection station. So it is very, very scalable, depending on your requirements and the volumes of data that you want to process. I also wanted to highlight that there's three collection options listed here. So the preference is to use the ITDA knowledge module that hooks into the patrol agent, and it's the one that most customers use. And again, someone that's an existing TSOM customer, that's an ideal option. You've got agents out there already. You can deploy the KM and start collecting data using that. There is a standalone ITDA agent. I put that in brackets here because more recently, and if people have looked at the documentation, you can see that there it's still supported, but it's not actively being developed as we move forward. So it can still be used, but as I say, most customers use the patrol agent. There is also the option to collect data remotely over standard protocols, things like SSH, etc. Now, ITDA does work standalone, but you're going to get best benefit if you use it with your other BMC products. So it's integrated with, as you would expect, the Remedy SSO, so you can log in, authenticate with your usual usernames and passwords and have the same groups and so on across different components. We can send events from ITDA through to TSOM, and we can collect events from TSOM into ITDA for analysis as well. We can take changes and incidents from Remedy or Helix and analyze those within ITDA. There's also the option to set up an ETL within TrueSight Capacity Optimization, if you're using that tool, to be able to then collect business metrics into TSCO from ITDA. So if you've got log files giving you numbers of transactions or certain activity levels and things like that, then we can use the ETLs within TSCO that pull that information through from ITDA. And as you hopefully would expect, the presentation server allows us to also then show dashboards from ITDA, and hopefully I'll get time to show that a bit later as well. And we can cross-launch from events that have come through into TSOM back down into ITDA. So there's a lot of integration between the existing products as well. Okay, so just to give a quick overview of what I'm going to try and fly through as part of a demonstration, going from basically, this is how we set up data collection through to some searching you can do and the analysis and comparison that's provided within ITDA. So I've got a sort of simplified example of some of the things I've worked on with customers around monitoring some log files. In my example here, my 3 log files are going to be all on one server for simplicity purposes for the demonstration, but in a production environment, these could be 100 log files spread across 10 servers. Once we've configured the collection and the data's being pulled together into ITDA, all of that information is back in the central back end, and all of the things that we're doing with it will be exactly the same regardless of where that data come from, or even if some of it's log files and some of it's events. Okay, so I'll talk about how we can configure the data collection. I'll do a bit of talking about how we can define and do some searching of the index data. We can save the searches, create some dashboards within ITDA, and then we'll look at a scenario of a transaction failing and how we can then drill into the log files from the presentation server back into ITDA and look at some of the compare and analyze features within there. So there's examples here of the log files that it's collecting data from. There, as I say, I've tried to simplify it down to make it easy to go through very quickly. We've got an audit log file where users are logging in and logging out of our application, so there's date timestamps and the username and the action that's occurred. We've got a transaction log file where, again, we have a username associated at a date and time and whether they're starting a transaction, what step they are within the transaction, what sort of transaction it is, and a transaction ID. And then a message log, which is just really an example of a system message log of, everything's working okay, system checks fine, or whether a error's occurred. It's just trying to mimic what the sort of things we would see in a standard sort of system. As I say, simplified down, but still representative of the sort of things that we see being done. Okay, so let me flip over to the system. So when I log into ITDA, you'll get presented with a top-level dashboard that's a default one that's provided. I'm logged in as the user admin, so I can come in and do all the configuration and setup. So first of all, in terms of setting up the data collection, we need to go to administration, and I'll just pull up the log files that I'm collecting from. And there's a list of 4 here. 3 of them are the ones we're interested in. So there's my audit log, the message log, and transaction log. Now, if I go and look at the configuration of those, I'll just highlight the things that need to be defined and some of the things that can be changed. So first of all, each collector will have a name, and you'll see when we're looking at the searches in a minute that the collector name can be part of the search if you want. And then we specify what sort of collection we're doing. And on here, we're doing a collection from a log file, local to a collection agent. Some of the options are remote connection over SSH, as I mentioned earlier. And we're actually collecting from a patrol agent here, so one that's linked into our system. And literally all we need to do to start looking at information from these log files is to point it at the directory path, and then I've got a single transaction name, single log name, transaction.log. But as everyone will know, you're able to, log files might have date timestamps or various patterns and so on. You can put those sorts of patterns in here as well, and it will pick up the relevant log files. Once we've pointed it at the actual log file, we need to then define what the actual structure of that log file is, and also the date time format, because those are the things that really enable us to pick the information up and start analyzing it. So I've just chosen a free text with timestamp option here. You'll see there's some predefined predefined log patterns within here, and you're able to also define all your own. Again, that's it's things that we could go into in more detail in further calls specifically about ITDA, but the main thing is we can pick the information out of the log file and pull it into ITDA to then be analyzed. And typically, it's really about defining what the date format is. Initially, when you point it at the file, you get the option to auto-detect. And then if we click preview here, you're able to see that examples of that's a single line in my log file that's been picked up. And because we defined the timestamp, which was there, and then even though I said free text, if it's got sort of key value pairs with equals, it will pick those up automatically for me and create fields. If you've got other things that are fields that are defined, as I say, you can define those with regular expressions and tell it how to pull those out, and they'll also get pulled out and assigned as fields that we can then search and query after they've been indexed. So we can see that all happening. Yep.
We've got a question from Bruno. He's asking how the file permission to read the log file is managed, whether it's through the OS or through the patrol agent.
Whatever you would need to have access from whatever, or you need read access from the patrol agent to the OS file, I think is the answer to that, if that answers the question. It obviously needs to be able to have read access to the file. It only needs read access. It doesn't need actually write or to be able to update the file. It just needs to be able to read the file as the user that's running the patrol agent.
Okay, thank you. And Bruno, if that doesn't answer, please just follow up.
Yeah, let us know. Other things just to highlight on the initial configuration setup, obviously that things like the locale, and there's how often the data file, the log is polled, and it's only going to be pulling data from if you doing it every minute, it's only going to pull the updates in the last minute as part of that. It doesn't reread the whole file. So how often you want it to poll and consume the data. And then there's another item here, index block. That's really a concept within ITDA where you can segregate the data into things like small, medium, and large as an index block. And there's two attributes. To me, there's really two attributes to the index block. One is how long the data is kept, whether it's the raw data is kept for something like 7 days or 14 days or 30 days. And then also whether the data is archived off or not, because you also have the option, I didn't have that on the architecture diagram, but you have the option to archive the data off so that you can reload it in historical data to do additional searches if you wanted to. We can also assign tags to any of the data that's collected. That could be associated with the patrol agent or the server that's actually providing the collection, or it could be something specific to an application that you want to tag the data. Again, just so that it can simplify your searches later on. If you group things by application or business or whatever attribute you want, you can define that just to tag things. So there's lots of things that can be configured and set up as part of the data collection. I'm just trying to show a sort of simple and easy way to get up and running. So once we've done that and started it collecting data for our 3 different logs, which we've got here, we can then start looking at that data. Now we can either go to the search and just start typing in a search manually, or we can start from, I've got my transaction log. I can say, actually, I just want to see the collected data from the transaction log. And that's effectively just starting a search for me. And you can see, the beginning of the search is collector name equals transaction log. So this now shows me all of the entries that it's collected from my transaction log over the last hour, the last 60 minutes, and shows me how it's separated those out. If I go to the detailed view, we can then see all of the individual fields that have been pulled out, whether the transaction started, completed, been processed, which user it was, the transaction ID, whatever the data is that's in your log file, and the way that you've told it to process it. And we can additionally add other searches, filters to this, so I might actually only be interested in transactions that are for the user Graham. And then we can rerun the search, and we can then see the data for those specifically as well, and then it's subsetted down. So you can very interactively, very easily run the different search queries. We might also want to choose to only see ones that are actually processing transactions as opposed to started or completed. So where we've got fields, we can say we're interested in searching by this particular field. We don't have to type it in manually. You can just come and select it. It adds it here to the filter, and then we research, and it will redraw. So it's very easy to start looking at the data that's been collected and analyzing that data, just doing some very simple searches and so on. I'm just showing how you can start from doing that, because what you would typically do is perform those searches and create some saved searches, which are reporting information that you're specifically interested in seeing. And those saved searches can be used for a number of different things. One of those is that you could have a saved search that's creating data that's shown on a dashboard, which I'll show you in a moment. But you can also have a saved search that looks for certain things and may then generate an event off into TSOM. And that can be as simple as just looking for error or failure or some sort of text string, a specific error message for a database or something like that. But it can be a lot more involved. The example here of where we've got a log file with transactions with transaction IDs, if I just flick to a copy of a segment of the log file, so hopefully this is a bit more visible than what was on the PowerPoint. So this is an example of a section of the log file where the user's logging in, there's a date and time stamp and the transaction ID. They perform some action, and the transaction ID is there, and the action gets and the transaction gets completed. Now, in a typical application, that's going to be interspersed with all the other users and all the other transaction IDs that are going on as well. And what we can do within ITDA is use the power of the search and the aggregation and correlation to actually just pull those out and group them together. So you can start looking at information on a per user level, a transaction level in this example. But there are many different use cases where being able to analyze multiple lines within a log file linked by IDs or usernames, that it's going to really simplify what you're able to drill into and understand. So that's an example of the log file, and there's we've got some saved searches here that are not just doing selections, for example, by pulling back from the transaction log, but then saying group by transaction ID, and the transaction should include a started with, it will end with, completed, and then what it will do for me is give you things like overall time for the transaction, the number of steps, the number of log file entries that match that, and so on. And we can build up based on these saved searches and then create some top-level dashboards. So let me just give an example of that. So those saved searches that pull back data can show us, for example, the total number of entries in our log files. We can have a breakdown of activity by user, for example. So to me, there's so much richness of information that's potentially in log files and data that's useful to have, that can be integrated with our monitoring, that if it's not available via an API from the application and systems, it is available in the log files, but it's about harnessing that data and gathering the information and presenting it in a way that's useful. And it can be across multiple log files. It can just be from a single file. And so I've got examples, logins and logouts every 5 minutes. We would expect those to be similar sort of amounts in this example. So just being able to see that, the split of updates versus queries, or whatever the, the different attributes are within your environment. And then moving on from that, being able to look, if we've got errors that have occurred in the environment, if we've got transactions that have completed, and so on. And again, the breakdown of completed transactions by users, and this one is showing failed transactions, which I don't have at the moment in my environment for the current point in time, which is obviously a good thing. So that's it was a quick fly through, drilling in and searching and doing it by text, by saved searches, having dashboards to present the information. What I also wanted to show was how we would potentially use the analysis and correlation when we don't know what we're searching for, we don't know a particular string we're looking for. So if we get an event through into TSOM, for example, as we have here, we've got our presentation server, I've got an event, you could have got to this point via a service model, an application model, just a list of events, and so on. A transaction failure for a user occurring in our system, and that was at 7:42 this morning. Then you may have seen in your presentation server cross-launch list of items. You have the option to launch to ITDA Analytics. And if I click on that, what that will do is take me to ITDA. It will search not now an individual log file, but all of the log files relevant to the area I'm looking at. That could be a particular server, which it's done in this case. It could be an application. And it then shows me all of the entries for the log file. And you'll see, 7:42, 7:43 has appeared in the middle. It's showing me 30 minutes before and 30 minutes after. And what we're able to do is not just look at all of those entries, but also say, well, what happens if we compare the data for maybe the same time but the previous hour? So, does it look the same for the previous hour? And then it will come back and we can see, things vary, but there or thereabouts, we've got the same sort of activity, with the greeny color being the current time period and the yellow being previous time period. And in a similar fashion, you might want to compare for, say, the same time but the previous day. Again, it's is there anything different happening? And again, it looks reasonably fine in this example. So we also have the ability to go in and say we want to analyze the data automatically. Now, from here it's all context sensitive. We can drill into individual bits and pieces and so on. But let's just let it analyze the data across the environment, and it comes up and shows us the patterns using the coalesce function. It shows us the patterns of the number of items that it sees that are sort of just with transaction IDs, with actions, users logging in, logging out, etc. And in a live environment, you'd get loads of these different ones with different log file entries. But you're able to say, well, just show me the anomalies. And you get two different types of anomalies. One is things like outliers, where you've got entries in the log files where you might have suddenly seen significantly more of a type or significantly less, which we don't have any in this example. But if you suddenly saw hundreds more logins occur, then it could be some sort of denial of service. Or you can also say, well, what are the rare ones? And in my environment here, then what it's done is looked across all of the log files and systems in the environment I've got. And what we can see that happened at the same sort of time as our transaction failure for a particular user, Anne, is that across in some system log file, we also saw we're unable to, fork an additional process because we've reached a limit. Now, to me, that's the sort of thing that, I've seen so many times, been around quite a while, and, there's so often that there's sort of hard limits that have been set and things that are hidden away in log files that it's difficult to find manually, because you've got to go and find the right time, and there'll be different time zones and all the different bits and pieces. But having it all in one place and letting it pull it together and then perform that automatic analysis and generate the anomalies for you allows you to easily see that and drill down and identify the problem, and obviously then be able to go and fix that far more quickly and easily than you would have done otherwise. The other thing I just wanted to touch on as well is back up at the presentation server level, we can add ITDA as part of the dashboard. So if I just call it transaction, and you may have seen already, you may have tried it, but we can add dashlets. I'll just have ITDA ones in this, but obviously you can mix and match ITDA with all the other dashlets, and we can then add into here items from our saved searches. So I showed you them in the ITDA dashboards earlier, but you can also show them up in the presentation server. So I can do that. I can add my failed transactions. And do that. And choose the right search.
Hey, Graham, while you're doing that, I just want to do a time check that we're at the bottom of the hour, so.
Yep. No, I'm just going to do this dashboard, and then I was going to stop.
Okay.
I realise I'm slightly ahead of myself, or slightly behind, slightly running out of time. There we go. We say make that a line, and add one for the overall transactions. Which obviously can either be saved and made available to yourself or shared with other people, as you would expect with the presentation server. Just, I should have made that one. I've been more interested as a line. And let's just make it look at the last hour. Right, and save that. Refresh that. So we can see the information up in the top level presentation server, but as usual with the presentation server, it's not just about looking at it at that top level. We have the integration such that, we could say we're interested in what's happening at a particular point in time. We can click on that. It will take us down to ITDA and drill in, and you can see that information relative to the point in time, and drill in and do all of the things I've been talking about from there as well. So from those top level dashboards in the presentation server. Anyway, so as I say, that was really what I wanted to go through very quickly. It was a very quick fly through, but it was really to just try and make sure that people understand it's so much more than just monitoring log files. There's some automatic analytics in there, identifying anomalies, etc. You can use all the various functions and things to get a lot more richness of information out of your log data. And what I would say is, you need to look at the data that's in your log file, think about what you would like to get out of it, and then go and think about how you do that with ITDA. Because I think there are so many different things you could do, but it's impossible to have all of those different use cases and things documented. But if you've got the information in there, it should be possible in some way of getting it out and presenting it in a way you want. Okay, Seth, so are there more questions?
So I think your presentation was so comprehensive, Graham, that everybody was stunned into silence, but we don't have any more questions. We don't have any more questions either in the chat or the QA window. Klaus had to take off. He said to say thank you. So this was an excellent presentation. I certainly learned a lot, and I think it really does set the stage for having some more detailed conversations about specific use cases and maybe diving into the tool a little bit more in the future. So I'm very excited that we can set up a few more sessions later on in the year. Folks on the call, thank you so much for joining. And if you have any follow-up, again, the recording as well as the slides that Graham presented will be available on Communities in the next 24 hours or so. If you have any follow-up questions that you would like to follow up on, you can either ask a question on Communities or send me an email directly. My email's on the screen, and it'll be available in the deck as well. So thanks everybody for your time. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and we look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks. And Graham, thank you very much for presenting.
Okay, no problem. Thanks, Seth.
All right.